Christian Parenting.
Hey friends, welcome to the Christian Parenting Podcast. I am so excited to be talking with Sandra Stanley today. You guys are going to love her. Sandra and her husband, Pastor Andy Stanley, are authors of the book Parenting, Getting It Right. And let me tell you, this book is a gift. It is packed with wisdom for every stage of parenting, from littles to adults. So today I talk with Sandra about her book and the heart behind writing a parenting book. We talk about parenting with relationship in mind, adjusting our parenting as our kids grow and enter different stages, and how grandparenting is probably going to look a lot different than parenting. I hope you love it. Hi, Sandra. Thank you so much for being here on the Christian Parenting Podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me, Steph. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, I am super excited to talk to you about your book today called Parenting, Getting It Right. And before we started, I kind of told you this already, but I've read a lot of parenting books. I started way before I was ever a parent. When I was in seminary, taking some parent education and guidance classes, we had to read parenting books, and I kept reading them as I worked in youth ministry. And this one is one of the better ones I've ever read. Like, it's so relatable, practical, encouraging. It's easy to follow. So, and it's not overwhelming.
Well, good. I'm glad. We had a great time writing it, just bantering back and forth and, going back and reading in journals, finding stories about our kids and then laughing about all that again. It was for the most part, a very fun project.
I can imagine.
Yeah,
I can imagine. But before we dive into the book, because I have a lot of questions I want to cover, tell us about your family. People who don't know your family, tell us about who you are and just like a word or a phrase that describes you guys.
Sure. So let's see. So I'm Sandra Stanley. I'm married to Andy. We have been married 34 years and we've got 3 kids, all married as of September. Andrew, our oldest, is 30. He's married to Anna and they got married on September 17th. So he was our last man down. And then Garrett is 28. He's married to Danielle. And Allie, our daughter, is married to Clay. They are both in ministry. And they just gave us our first grandbaby 3 weeks ago. So
congratulations.
Yeah. So we
had a busy fall.
It's been a crazy busy fall. And I was going to say, we could actually spend the whole 30 minutes me just holding pictures up to the screen. So you could just look at this precious baby that, of course, is the smartest, most brilliant, beautiful baby to ever live. So,
of course.
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah. And can you just describe, what's a word or phrase that describes you guys?
Let's see. This is really kind of funny. And I don't know how it works out in all Enneagram numbers, but Andy and I are both 1s.
Oh, okay.
So we're kind of super planned and organized, if that counts as an answer. It's just kind of funny. We just like all of our ducks in a row, both of us, which kind of works well. So.
Are your kids like that too? Do you have any 1 kids?
No, we don't. We don't have any 1 kids.
Oh, that's funny.
Let's see. They're all so different. And you know that because you have 3. Sometimes you look at them and you think, how could these kids have even come from our gene pool or even the same gene pool as each other?
Yes.
Everybody is so different. And I think, in a couple of interviews, people say, what is your biggest parenting regret? So we could just start there. Andy and I laugh about how we wish, it's not super funny, but we wish we had been a little more laid back about don't touch the walls and, don't run in the house and all that. So looking back, I think we're going to be way better grandparents with way fewer rules, which I think is kind of the way it goes anyway.
I think that's the point.
It's the whole point. No rules at our house. But it's going to look a lot different than it did with our kids. And, hopefully they survived all that fairly unscathed, but
it's funny that you say that because we are getting ready to go visit my in-laws. And I know for a fact that when my husband was growing up, if they wanted cereal, they had to eat a healthy breakfast and then they could have some sugar cereal. Because that was just the rule. Sugar was limited. And my son just last night was like, we're going to Mima's house and we're going to get a cookie for breakfast dessert and lunch dessert and dinner dessert and a snack.
She's a different lady. Yeah.
Yes, you are. Because that's Mima's job.
That's right. Same thing I would ask my mom every once in a while when our kids were little. I'm like, where is my mother? What have you done with my mother? This is not the same person that raised me.
Yeah.
So
Well, you'll have fun grandparenting.
That's right. That's right. Super fun.
All right. And there's one other thing that I'm asking all of my guests, and that is, what is one thing that you want every parent to know?
Oh, gosh, that's such a good question. I think the first thing I would say is there are no perfect parents. Well, there's one perfect parent and we are not him. And so, all of our parenting journeys are going to be messy at times. We're not going to always get it right. And I think there's a lot of parenting grace. So even on the front end of this conversation that we're about to have with lots of kind of nuts and bolts of parenting, I do want to lay the foundation and say, there is no way to be a perfect parent. Don't try to hold yourself to an unrealistic standard. And I think God offers us a lot of grace in our parenting journey.
Yeah, He is the only perfect parent.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Okay, so you start your book, and I think it's kind of like one of the most relatable parenting moments. You're leaving the hospital with your first baby, and your inner monologue, and this is just like, they're making us leave. Like, I think every parent feels that way. Like, at least I did. My husband did a lot. Everyone feels that way. And
it's like this hospital has not thought this through.
No,
they should not be sending this baby home with us.
Oh yeah, we did. Yeah. Yes. I mean, we could go on a lot of stories about the first few days of parenting your first child, but I think that's the first time you have the question. And I think I still have this question. I think it goes forever is, am I doing it right?
Yeah.
And you talk about that in the book, and you challenge your readers to find their it. So what do you mean by it? And then why is that important?
Mm-hmm. Right. So we titled the book Parenting, Getting It Right. And when you first read that, you think, wow, that sounds pretty arrogant. Andy and Sandra think they have all the answers and they're going to tell us how to do this right. And we all know there is no, right way for everybody. But one of the things we learned, and I'll tell a little story that leads up to it. Andy and I, when we first had Andrew, we waited about 4 years before we had kids. And so we had Andrew. He's about, 4 or 5 months old. And we were headed down the highway, headed to Hilton Head Island. My parents rent a big house on the beach every Memorial Day week for the whole family. And we were the ones with the first grandchild. So it's a smaller group back then. But we're driving down the road, got Andrew in the back. And Andy and I are both kind of, we're kind of processors and goal setters, sort of. And so we were just talking about, okay, here we are, we're starting a family. What do we want our family to look like? Do we need to set some goals? What do we want to do? And so Andy just said the most interesting thing. He said, Sandra, I want our family to end up looking like your family. And what I mean by that is you have a family where everybody loves to be together when they don't have to be together anymore. And he said, that's what I want for our family. And to me, that was not revolutionary. That was just the norm in my family. I'm the middle of 3 kids. We have enjoyed each other in our adulthood, not necessarily when we were growing up. We were just normal kids that kind of wanted to kill each other sometimes. But as adults, our whole family loved being together, and we didn't like missing out when everybody else was together. And that was just something that Andy noticed that I would have never even thought about, because again, what's normal for you, you don't notice. And so we talked about that. We thought, okay, well, then, how do we get there? And we had been in youth ministry for a while. So we had, we talked to a lot of people who we felt like were getting it right. And of course, talked to my parents, and then just kind of downloaded some of the things that were true of my family growing up. And we just decided we decided our bullseye on the target for parenting was raising kids who want to be with us and want to be with each other, even when they don't have to be anymore. So we identified that as our it. And as we moved along in our parenting journey, we realized to get there, we have to parent with the relationship in mind, not behavior modification necessarily, all the other things that go with parenting, which are real and you have to do. As we think about our parenting journey, we want to constantly have in front of us the fact that we are parenting with the relationship in mind. And that became our it. So when we say parenting, getting it right, it's all about identifying what your goal is as a parent. And we feel like on this side of our parenting journey with adult kids, we're reaping some benefits of that having been our it. We love being there with our kids. They seem to love being with us and each other. And we just feel like we're kind of reaping the benefits of that being what our focus was in our journey.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like my family. I'm the middle of 3 as well.
Yeah.
And as adults, I mean, my sister, I have 3 girls in my family. We fought a lot, but
of course,
as adults, I mean, kids do that. That's part of the growing up process. But
that's right.
we love being together as adults. I live 2 miles from my younger sister. My older sister lives in Florida. So we don't see her as often, but a lot of times when we do family dinners, we FaceTime her in. But that has become part of our it too, as we parent our kids, is we're like, this is what we want in our future. So I really valued your focus on relationships in the book, being as that's part of our family it too. So let's talk a little more about parenting with the relationship in mind. Like what does that look like? How does that inform how we balance some of that, like behavior modification and discipline versus relationship? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, one of the first things we learned in our parenting journey, and this wasn't original with us, we heard this from multiple different people, and it kind of informed how we would parent with the relationship in mind. It's the 4 seasons of parenting, or the 4 stages of parenting. And if you Google that, you know, there's so many different versions, but they're all pretty consistent in the way they break it down. And so I'll just break that down real quick, and then we'll go to how that relates to the empty nester years. But when you think about the seasons or the stages of parenting, the discipline years are those early years, like 0 to 5 years old. And these are the years where we're teaching our kids that there are consequences for their actions, for their good and for their safety. We just need them to obey in this season. And consistency is the key in these 0 to 5 years old. And then the training years are kind of the heavy lifting, middle years, 5 years to 12 years old. And training is a little bit different because our kids now can reason a little bit, and we begin explaining kind of the why behind the what in our parenting. And we start explaining while we're training in this season. And then the coaching years are the ones that everybody gets so nervous about, the teenage years. I think young parents are like, I remember when I was a teenager, this is scary. But the coaching years are 12 to 18, and we're just on the sidelines a little bit more. Mm-hmm. We are kind of coaching them while they're learning to make independent decisions, because pretty soon they'll be launching out of our homes, and we want them to take some skills with them. But like a coach, there are times we yank them off the field, for a bit. And that goes really well always, because they have great attitudes about that. But we're letting our kids in this season experience more natural consequences of their actions. And so for parents in the coaching years, we're really focused on connecting more than correcting. And then the friendship years of, kind of 18 on, where we are now with our kids. And, it can be super fun. And so as it relates to parenting with the relationship in mind, our approaches and things change in these different seasons of life. And because we knew what our win was, we had sort of identified our bullseye on the target, or our it. We just decided ahead of time, there are some practices in each of these different seasons of parenting that need to be unique to those seasons and that we need to focus on. And the truth is, everybody's parenting in a direction, whether they've chosen that direction or not. There may just be some default thing. And to your earlier point, sometimes we parent, the way we were parented, or the way that we grew up. And that can be a good thing in your case. It could be a bad thing if somebody didn't have strong models. And so we're always parenting in a direction. It may be toward behavior modification, obedience, just wanting, our kids to obey. It could be toward academic excellence or sports, or, we're just all parenting in a direction. And so we decided early, if we're going to parent with the relationship in mind, there's some specific things we want to focus our kids on in the different seasons. How to honor other people. That's all about relationships. How to restore broken relationships. Our whole lives, we're going to have relational tension here and there, and we need to understand how to restore relationships. We need to understand how to prioritize our most important relationships, and that's something that we can teach our kids. And again, they understand different things, and we can have different approaches in the different seasons of life. But when we're parenting with the relationship in mind, it just gives us a framework or a lens through which, to make some of the parenting decisions that otherwise might be a little trickier to figure out.
Yeah, I feel like as a working mom, 2 of my goals for the new year are to take better care of myself and simplify. And one of the ways I'm doing that is with HelloFresh. There's a reason HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit. They make it so simple. All I have to do is pick my meals and my delivery date, and all of the pre-portioned ingredients and step-by-step instructions come right to my door. That means less hassle, less wasted food, and they have health-forward options like over 30 calorie-smart and protein-smart recipes each week. The recipe cards are easy to follow and they're full of pictures, so it makes cooking with my kids really fun too. And we all know that when they are involved in the cooking, they're more likely to eat it, so everyone wins. We have a great deal for you right now because I know that mornings can be crazy as a parent. I often find myself forgetting breakfast or grabbing something really fast. But you can go to hellofresh.com/CPPodcastFree and use the code CPPodcastFree for free breakfast for life. That's one breakfast item per box while the subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life at hellofresh.com/CPPodcastFree with the code CPPodcastFree. My son is almost 11 and I can feel the transition taking place. You know, our relationship is changing dramatically. Yeah. He started middle school this year. He talks about his friends differently. He's starting to change physically, emotionally, socially. Like everything's just changing. And it's hard on me as a mom because he reacts to me differently than he used to. Yeah. And you know, I can feel that moving from training to the coaching. So how do you move into those different transitions, like smoothly and confidently? Because I feel like I'm floundering in this transition.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. You know, and here's the thing. Our kids are going to transition from one of those stages to the next stage, whether we do or not. And, you know, to get where we want to get, we've got to transition with them. And that can be tricky. And especially for a mom with boys, I remember both of my older two are boys. I remember exactly what you're talking about. And I remember something that Andy's mom had said way back, because she kind of gave me a heads up on that ahead of time. She said, I remember when Andy was transitioning and I realized that my relationship was changing. And she said, I realized that just like my husband, I mean, you know, men have this inside need for respect. I mean, it's just something that they have for us to notice them. You know, there's just some things that are true, typically not always. I mean, you don't want to put everybody in a box, but there's some things that are more unique to men. And as our boys start becoming men, I think it's important for us to begin shifting a little bit in how we relate to them and building them up and, you know, noticing things, watching, admiring them, I think is a really big deal. But when Andrew, both of our boys were different in this, but when Andrew kind of hit the stage where your oldest son is, he basically went to his room for about 3 years. And I thought, okay, wait, what happened to my sweet, you know, what happened to that young, you know, kid that loved to talk to me and all? So Andy actually circled back around with him away from me and said, hey, when you walk in the door, you know, at least kind of grunt toward your mom, you know, give her just something, throw her something before you head up the stairs. And so I think, you know, this is maybe a season where a dad steps in a little bit more to say, hey, just so you know, this isn't something you would naturally know, but your mom loves you so much and she's so used to a different kind of relationship. Let's think about some ways that are, you know, not super painful for you to give your mom a little bit of attention. And that's hard. That's hard in our single parent homes, you know, for moms that are trying to do this alone is a whole different thing. But if you are in a home where there are two parents, this is when the dad circles around and kind of helps you process what's happening in your son and helps them process part of that relationship that you know, that they really do deeply want to have with you. They just don't know how to do it so well anymore.
Right. I love how you bring that up and how it can be so much teamwork and dad can step in. Because I think that's also hard to let go of that control as mom.
Yes.
You're because we're used to my job.
I know we're used to carrying the weight. And as they transition to that coaching coaching season, we really do have to think about several different components that we need to tweak and change our approach on. And that's one of them for boys. For Garrett, it was different. He didn't go to his room. He's more of if you've done the temperament test, he's more of the yellow, you know, he's the Enneagram 7, just a party in a body, is our middle one. And so he didn't pull away as much as his kind of changes sort of manifested a little more in rage. And I would say, hey, Garrett, I need you to run up to your room and scream as loud as you can 3 times into your pillow, and then come back down and let's have a conversation.
I'm going to try that one.
Yeah. And then with Allie, completely different. Hers manifest more in tears. Mm-hmm. And I had told her way before she hit that season, I said, you know what? One day you're going to kind of hit the season where you might cry and you don't even know why you're crying. And so, I think too, laying the foundation, even with our boys, kind of laying that out a little bit early so that when it happens, they kind of recognize it is another kind of idea for navigating that season. But when it happened with Allie, there was one day and she just, some small thing happened and she just burst into tears. She goes, Mom, I think this is that thing you told me about where I'm crying because I don't even know why I'm crying. So it manifests differently in our different kids and certainly differently, with boys and girls.
Yeah. So we have 2 boys and a girl too.
Oh, do you?
Yes. So I think I just need you on speed dial for the rest of my parenting journey.
Right.
That's what I need here.
Because we learned a lot of things the hard way. Yeah. So a lot of what's in the book, we learned the hard way. It's so funny. It's a little nerve-wracking to think of writing a book on parenting because it seems to communicate, we know everything. And we always did everything right. So now we're going to share with you, from our vast vault of knowledge. And the truth is, we learned so much the hard way. Our home was as messy as anybody's. There were days, especially during those early years, where I thought, my goal today is not relationship. My goal is for us to all be alive at the end of this day. Either for me not to have killed somebody or for them not to have killed each other. Our home was so normal, just like everybody else's. And there were days that it was just, hey, our goal today is survival. That's what the goal is. So we'll get there.
Well, I think you're really honest about that in the book. And I really love that. Like you kind of talk about every stage and some of the ups and downs and what you learned and what you walked through. So I really appreciate that. I also appreciate that you talk about the friendship stage with your kids and the stage you're in now where everyone's married and you have a grandbaby and you're an empty nester and that you love it. I think sometimes as younger moms, we have this idea that like we're in the best right now. And eventually we're going to lose it and it's not going to be good anymore. So I just really appreciate when I hear people talk about the later seasons of life as empty nesters being really special in its own way. Yeah. So I appreciate that.
It really is. And you know what, honestly, Steph, that's one of the reasons we put a chapter in the book about marriage, because you're married, you're a family before you have your kids, and you're a family a long time after you launch your kids. And Andy and I so wanted to get to the end of our heavy duty parenting years with our relationship still intact and great and, just enjoying and liking each other. And so there were a number of things we did through the years to prioritize our marriage over our parenting. Mm-hmm. And that's non-intuitive during those heavy duty, crazy, parenting years. But there were just some practices we had that we just decided, you know what, this is how we prioritize our marriage because, our marriage is going to go a lot longer than 18 years, we hope. So you plan for that, just like, kind of make plans ahead of time for other things.
Yeah. I was just talking with my mom over the weekend because we were having kind of a small crisis with one of our kids. Yeah. I was very upset and I called my mom, not knowing what to do. And her response was, you're doing the right things. Keep doing what you're doing. But first and foremost, focus on God and focus on Trevor, my husband. She was like, those are the things that are going to carry you. So don't forget to focus on those too. Don't get too caught up in the parenting that you don't focus on those.
Oh, such things. Wise counsel. That is so wise. And, it's so true. It's so true. Those are the pillars and those are the pilings that go deep when everything else kind of sways a little bit. Yeah. Your relationship with the Lord and your marriage, those are the pilings that go deep.
Yeah. And it was so easy to overlook those things in parenting.
Yeah, it is.
Like it really is. You don't want to admit that, but it is. You're exhausted.
It is. You get busy. Yes. Yeah. You get busy. It's hard. It's hard to think of prioritizing that over the crisis of the moment because, squeaky wheel. The kids are way squeakier usually than spouses. So,
yes. Yes. Yeah. So one last thing I want to kind of cover is creating an environment, and this goes back to relationship, is how do we, if we're going to parent with relationship in mind, we have to be communicating, we have to be talking with our kids. And when we have one who goes up to his room and doesn't want to talk and just wants to grunt, or one who is a little more emotional or angry, or how do we create an environment where they want to talk to us, or and how do we like keep hope when they're maybe not talking to us as much?
Yeah. That's a great question. And that usually, again, happens during the coaching season. And there are just a few things that Andy and I, as we looked back and thought through that, there were a few things that we did. One of them was we just decided, and we see this, when parents around us, or when you're in ministry watching families, it is so easy to try to pull our kids into things that interest us rather than focusing on what actually interests them. And I think if we want our kids to talk to us, we got to figure out them. We have to be students of our kids and understand, what is Andrew interested in? What is Garrett interested in? What is Allie interested in? And how do I get interested in that in a way that we can have conversations? And again, to our earlier point, our kids are also different. With Andrew, we learned that if we wanted to have a conversation with him, and me, really, I'll talk about this a little more from the mom perspective. If I wanted to have a conversation with Andrew about something hard, or even not something hard, just to have some time with him, if I would sit down with him while he was watching a sports thing, he would watch any sports thing, anything that has a ball in it or some sort of, thing. He was all about it. So if I sat down and watched a Braves game with him, baseball game, or, anything, I would just be entering into his world. And I wasn't going to be chatty Cathy, because that's not what he wanted either. But those were the moments where we could just naturally and easily have some conversations. And I just learned that by being a student of Andrew. Being a student of Garrett, I learned that if I scratch his back, he talks. And he'll talk as long as I scratch his back. And he was the kid that we needed to talk to the most. He was the one that pushed the envelope a little bit more. We had a few more hard conversations with him. But as long as I scratched, he would talk. And I'm telling you, Steph, I was willing to get a hand cramp. And, so that was just, with him, that was just kind of a pathway to a conversation. With Allie, it was so funny because she would run in the door from wherever she was, school or whatever she was at. And if I was standing in the kitchen, she would just regurgitate her entire day. She would tell me everything. It would usually start with, "Mom, you're not going to believe." And then, she would just tell me everything. But if I was not present, when she came in the door and she got up to her room and started with whatever she was going to be doing next, I missed my moment. So those were my moments with her to say, "Oh my goodness, tell me more about that." Or, "Well, what about, if I had something I wanted to talk about, well, what about the thing yesterday about the so-and-so and so?" And, that's when I could get her to engage with me and talk with me. So I think it's so important for us to be students of our kids. And it's never been easier. We've got temperament testing, we've got Enneagram, we've got love languages. There's so many ways to be a student of our kids. And it's so worth putting in the effort for that, especially in those coaching years when, as teenagers, they're just naturally going to shut down a little bit.
Yeah.
And we have a few more things in the book too about keeping your kids talking, some funny stories and all of that. But, we'll have to go into all that.
Yeah, well, we'll point people in the direction of the book. But what I think is interesting is that, like, those conversations, you kind of have to release some expectations. But if you're going to sit next to him during a Braves game and try to have a conversation, it's probably not going to be the same as sitting in the kitchen with your daughter, because you got to wait for the right moment.
Exactly. Right? Which I think is actually the case anyway with sons generally. Again, they're all different. But I think with a son who tends to be a little quieter, it's going to be that way anyway, whether you're watching a Braves game or sitting in the kitchen. You have to think about your approach and your timing. That's the other thing I think that I have less of an ability and tendency to naturally do is think about my approach. I want to just barrel in, whether it's good or bad or whatever. I just want to barrel in and fix everything and let's be done with it and move on to the next thing. And our kids are so different. We have to pause and ask ourselves, what is the best approach for this topic, for this kid, and, in this scenario? And it may vary, even with the same kid. a different topic, it may vary how we need to approach it and what we need to do. With Allie, the other thing, she and I would just drive around. If I would buy her a Starbucks, when she was 14, and we could drive around and talk about all kinds of things. So, just figure out your child and find some creative ways to have those moments where you can have conversations and recognize there are just seasons where they're not going to talk as much. And, pressuring and pushing is not going to be effective either. So we got to know when to dial it back.
Yeah. Well, I think kind of what you said earlier when we first started is that every kid is so different. Even you're like, how are you all so different? You have the same parents and you grew up in the same house. Like,
exactly.
So you have to take the time to figure each kid out, because what works for one is not going to work for the
not
other.
Necessarily. Yeah.
Right. Which is really frustrating.
It is. And
it would be so much easier.
Consuming.
Yeah. But I think worth it, right?
I think my love language, Gary Chapman didn't put it in his book, but my love language is efficiency. I love efficiency, and efficiency is not relational. And so one of the hardest lessons for me to learn in my parenting was my goal in these relationships is not efficiency. Efficiency and, deep and meaningful relationships do not go together. So I had to dial back some things that were just natural approaches for me with all of my kids, because, efficiency isn't the goal. I can be efficient in my pantry systems and in my, my car, all these other areas, but efficiency and relationships, those two things don't go hand in hand. And that was a hard lesson for me to have to learn. So I'm an engineer, with background, and I rock at efficiency. And so that was tough for me.
I am going to be thinking about that for a very long time.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
I wish this has been so helpful for me. The whole book is so fantastic. I cannot recommend it enough. This conversation has been really helpful for me. I just really, really appreciate you.
Good. Thank you.
Before we go, can you tell everyone where they can find the book and where they can connect with you, Andy?
So the book is going to launch on January 17th, and it's on Amazon, all that. We actually did the audio ourselves, and that was super fun. So it'll be on Audible and all the things. But we also are going to have small group curriculum to go with it. Small group has been such a big deal for Andy and me since before we had kids, even to now. And so we always love trying to provide some things like that. So all that'll be on Amazon or on our on our North Point Ministries website. We'll direct you to all that. And of course, on our social media, we'll be doing some promotions and stuff like that too.
Awesome. And I will put links to all of that in the show notes that people can easily find you for sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today.
Steph,
I just really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me. And I'll look forward to hopefully meeting you in person sometime.
Yes, I would love that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for listening to the Christian Parenting Podcast. If you haven't subscribed, you can do that now, and that way you won't miss an episode. You can connect with us on Instagram at ChristianParenting_org and see more resources at ChristianParenting.org. And if you're a mom raising daughters, we have the perfect course for you. Visit cpguides.org to learn more about our Helping Moms Raise Confident Daughters online courses. And lastly, if you have enjoyed this podcast or other Christian parenting resources, please consider donating to this ministry. Visit ChristianParenting.org and click the donate button. Christian Parenting is 100% donor funded, and none of this would be possible without your help. We are so grateful for you. You're amazing. God bless you.
Nice buns, soft, fluffy, and ultra-low net carbs. Discover Hero Bread, the delicious ultra-low net carb bread with incredible taste and texture. Hero Bread has 0 grams of sugar and is under 100 calories per serving, plus high in fiber with 5 to 10 grams of protein per serving. Order from hero.co now and get 10% off your first purchase with promo code AH10. That's 10% off with code AH10, HERO.co.